All right. Hey everyone, welcome back to the Twitch channel for Maya and vray lighting currently. This is what I'm going to be working on. Hey everyone, welcome back to the gotta mute Twitch that real fast. Okay, great. All right, so today I'm just going to build a scene inside of Maya. So here's the idea is I'm thinking like client comes to you and they say, oh my god, we need a snow scene. It needs to have trees and rolling hills and mountains and stuff like that, and we need it all as soon as possible. When that happens, you can either get up and walk away and say, "Screw you guys, I'm going home," or you can say, "Sure, I'm gonna do this." I guess. Excuse me. Oi. All right, that's over. You can say, okay, let me do something for you. So I'm just gonna start by making a snowy scene. So I'm gonna cover in this sort of little moment here, creating snowy shaders, creating snowy terrains, making a simple tree, and then duplicating it all over the scene. And then setting up some vray lights, some vray materials, and rendering this thing out so that it looks pretty nice. And along the way, I'll be downloading some images and putting them in the right places and all that stuff. So you'll see the whole process of making this from like a blank Maya to to a nice snowy scene. All right, so we got a plane here, and I'm just gonna kind of rough it up a little bit. Let's probably make it a little wider. And I'm just gonna start grabbing some verts all over the place. I'm gonna hit B so that I can mess with the size of this and just start, pulling this thing around, creating an uneven terrain that will be the basis of our snowy scene here. So let's just scoot this up and let's roll that around. And eventually I'm gonna be hitting 3 on all this stuff, so it's gonna smooth out. So it's gonna look kind of nice. And we'll just go through and keep on messing with this stuff. Let's roll that one around. And I'm probably going to end up putting a displacement map into this as well. Just for further variation, stuff that I don't want to sit here and up the resolution of this polygon object like crazy so that I can add in all this detail myself. I'm just going to let a displacement map kind of take care of all that for me. All right, so that's kind of interesting. That's something that's it's got some stuff going on to it. Cool. So let's just scale that up a little. And here's what I'm gonna do: is let's start creating a simple little tree. So go here, make a cylinder, and this is basically like your creative director is telling you you have a couple of hours and they need to see something so they can show client tonight. And that happens all the time. And you're like, crap, let me work like as fast as I possibly can. So that's kind of what I'm gonna try to do today. I'm just gonna work really quickly, and I'm gonna take some shortcuts and all that stuff. But it's how it usually is in commercials. You need something right now, and whatever it takes, just get it out right now. So all right, just gonna extrude out some little roots from this thing. Oop. That's probably fine, and I'm going to scale them all a little bit, and then do another extrusion, hit T, gets back to this kind of funky tool. Alright, that's something. Alright, and then I'm actually going to take this whole ring here and just scale it up a little so we get this sort of bulge on our tree base, something like that. And then right now I'm just kind of pushing and pulling points to get something a little bit more visually interesting. So that's all that's going on right here. But let's just kind of take these top pieces now and sort of start to tuck it so that it's all going to go down into the ground. All right. And just pull this one over there. All right, cool. All All right, well, there's our tree stump. Pretty easy. I'll also just go and add an extra edge loop at the very bottom here, and that's just so that when I smooth it, this bottom doesn't like wrap up like a big round piece. So you can see it's kind of behaving in a nice way. There we go. It's looking a little bit more natural-ish, sort of. I mean, not really, but it's a step in the right direction, I guess. I'm just going to add a few edge loops in here so that this transition's a little tighter. And there we go. All right, it's kind of a dilapidated tree, but it will work fine for our purposes here. And then last but not least, I'm just going to add in one extra edge loop action going on up here, and one kind of down here. And this is basically just tightening up that transition as well, so that they don't end in like weird arm stubby things. Cool. All right, and then that'll just kind of sit in there like that, and it'll look nice. Okay, so now for the tree top, I'm just gonna go in really easily and make a cone. And that's like the only time I ever really use cones for anything is for something like this. I'm gonna delete the bottom face off this guy, and then I'm gonna start just messing with the ending point of all these verts here. And I'm gonna hit B so I can use this little fall off tool and just kind of create like an interesting shape pattern going on. So let's do that. A little bit of this. Just grab this vert over here. All right. Yeah, it's kind of interesting. It's doing some stuff. And then one thing that you really don't want to do as much as possible is have a bunch of vertices moving into one vert. So like right now, this vert has, a ton of different edges coming off of it, and you really only want, 4 edges coming off of a vert at any given time. One way to kind of get around this, and it's not really foolproof, especially when you're working with something like this. I should have added a few extra divisions when I first created the polycone, but now if I do it, it's gonna freak out. So I can't do an edge loop tool because of the one vert situation up here. So it doesn't know that this is like a loop. But what I can do is just do a cut faces tool, and it's sort of like the mega supercut. And I think it's actually called, they changed it in Maya, whatever this is, 2016. Is it the multi-cut now? No. Yeah, let me find this silly tool. It's gonna be in Polygon somewhere, like a mesh something. Sorry guys, should have looked this up first. Mesh. I know it's in here. Oh, that looks good. Multi-cut? Seems like that would be the one. Quadra. Okay, well, I know I can use this multi-cut tool. I mean, it's not ideal, but you just kind of go around like this and hit each edge, and it gives you a little percentage of like how far it's gone, or up the length of that edge. And there we go. All right, cool. Hit enter, and now let's just delete all this top stuff. Actually, you know what I'm gonna do instead of deleting it is I'm going to extract it. So extract faces from that. I'll scoot this up, and this is going to be our snow cap eventually. So I'm just going to leave that. And this stuff, I'm just going to grab all these and scoot them in on each other. And you'll see what I'm doing here in a minute. I'm going to bonnet all these on top of each other, so they're going to kind of create this stacked layering thing going on. Here, we can do it right now. So there's that one, and then we have a second one. I'm just going to rotate this around a little bit so it's special. And now I can actually go in here and start adding these extra edge loops. So insert edge loop, and there's one. And I'm just going to scale that out a little bit. Actually, I'm gonna scale it in because I want these things to flare out. Cool. You can see if I hit 3, we're getting some kind of interesting little flare outs. Oh, and I'm pulling up that extra menu just in case you guys are wondering. Hitting 3, sorry, hold down Shift and right click, and then I have this marking menu here for different tools when I'm within this selection type. And so Shift right click seems to do the trick, and it's really useful. And I'm just gonna go in and grab this edge and do an little extrude edge on that and push these all in so we get this sort of more like a snowy drooped style tree. And I'll do the same thing down here, edge, grab all those, extrude and tuck those in. All right, cool. And we'll make one more, rotate it around to its own thing and scale it up, or scale it down a little. And then now we've got a little cap here, and it's not going to fit on very nicely, but that's okay. And I'm going to do the same thing, take this bottom edge, shift, right click, extrude edge, push these in. We'll do it one more time with this because it's our big one, and push it in, and then actually tuck them in on themselves. So we create a little lip. And there you can see why it's so problematic to do a bunch of edges coming off of this one. Yeah, I mean you can tell right there it's struggling, but it's okay for now. We're just gonna leave it. All right, so this is kind of a funky looking tree, but it gets the job done. I mean, ideally you'd want to use like speed tree if you're really making a real forest. You want to use something like speed tree or onyx tree or one of those, which are really great at doing really nice looking realistic trees. I think actually the problem is, yeah, there we go, our base was so like massive. Okay, so let's just sort of, this is such a silly little cap. Oh well, it's okay. Ta-da! Alright, well that tree looks pretty awful, but it's fine, because this is just a tutorial. This is just an example of what you can do with stuff. All right, cool. Yikes, that is a abysmal tree. Oh well, whatever. All right, I'm just gonna group this all together and call this tree crappy 01. All right, good. Now that we got that out of the way. And also the pivot was put at the bottom at the center because we modeled this tree in the center, that it just snaps to the center, which is really handy because now when we're placing this tree, we can scale it from the ground and it should be fine. Okay, before I move on and actually start duplicating this tree around, I'm just going to throw some shaders on it just so it's got something. And here's what I'm going to do is take all these pieces, right click, assign new material, and do a vray material. And just scale this up a little. All right, vray material. I'm gonna make this kind of greenish. If we go over here to our vray material, we'll call this snowy tree green. I mean, it's not gonna actually be green because it's gonna be mostly snow. But here's what I do for snow. Snow, I almost never leave like pure white. I want to add just the hint of blue tone into it. And that just helps because my sky is going to be blue. It's going to be bouncing a lot of blue light in here. And having the snow a little bit blue as well just sort of helps cool off the whole scene. I mean, some people would say, no, the snow's supposed to be white. And you know, in certain situations, the snow should be white. But in a scene like this, an outdoor scene where I'm going to have a lot of snow, I'm going to make it just a tiny bit blue. All right, and so same kind of thing for the tree trunk. I'm just going to go here, assign new vray material, and we're going to call it tree trunk brown. And let's go over here to the brownish tone, maybe medium saturation, kind of dark, maybe a little bit more saturated than that. All right, and something like that's pretty good. And I'm just gonna add reflection color. Now this isn't a very realistic scene that I'm making here, so I'm not going to balance materials, but usually what you try to do is always balance your reflection and your diffuse. So for example, if I want a lot of diffuse, I'd have this at 0.8, and then my reflections would be around 0.2. And this is physically accurate. That's what these little amounts are here for. Or, 0.5 and 0.5, for example. Mixing in your color versus your reflection. As things get more reflective, they start to lose their diffuse color. But what I'm doing here, if I leave these both at 1, is it makes an unrealistic material, but it makes a material that looks kind of fun, and it's a little more whimsical and a little more fantastical. I don't know. It's it works. It's a different way. It's a different way of working. It's not physically accurate, and if you're doing physically accurate, do it the other way. But it's fun. In this way, always reflection glossiness. I rarely go below 0.5 on this value, because anything that requires a below 0.5, I'll actually switch my BRDF type to Ward, and then you'll see even at 0.5, if you look up here at the swatch, if I switch between blend and Ward, you can sort of see the specular highlight changing a little bit. Ward at 0.5 feels kind of like the lowest level of gloss that almost anything is going to have. Also, I've noticed that if I start going lower on that, some strange things can start happening on your reflections. You might get some hard edges where there should be all soft. I don't know, just weird things happen. So I would recommend trying to never go below 0.5 on your reflection glossiness. On the flip side, going above 0.9, say 0.95, could tend to lead to really, really like super ultra bright hot spots, like little speck hits. Like if you're doing something metal, your light is going to reflect into that thing, and it's going to just create this ultra bright hot spot, which is a nightmare. So I would recommend also not really going above 0.95 if you can. I mean, you can go to 1, you can go to 0.98, but if you're going to do that, I would unlock the highlight from the reflection glossiness and then control this separately. Put this at like 0.95 or 0.94 if my actual reflection glossiness needed to be somewhere around a 0.98. And the only reason I would use a 0.98 would be something like gold or copper or something that's like almost purely reflective, but it's got sort of a patina to it, or like it's a roughness to the material. Then I'd go to like a 0.98 on the reflection glossiness and a 0.95 or 0.94 on the highlight glossiness. Anyway, we can explore that as we go. I guess what's needing is like these need to be tiered more. Maybe I'll make one more. Oops, don't want that. It's Monday morning right now, and work stuff is indeed coming in, and I've got some plans today, so I'm trying to avoid it. And I just want to make some cool tutorials for people instead of picking up a job right now. All right, cool. So that's looking good. Oh, and of course our snow shader is going to need its own thing too. So in Maya 2016, they've changed up the hypershade quite drastically. So I've got right here. They added this attribute editor to it, which is awesome if it was the full attribute editor, but it's like this. It's this light version of the attribute editor. Oh, wait a second. Oh, it looks like that is the full attribute editor. Okay, that's actually okay. Good. I didn't even know that was there before. Well, in any case, I usually leave my attribute editor over here, and I want it to be separate from everything else because I use it for everything, not just hypershade. So I'm going to turn that off. And then they've got this new shader ball, which is great, but if you're working with a complex scene that has a bunch of stuff going on, that shader ball preview is going to be a pain in the butt, because every time you click on any object, it's going to load that in here. Or it's going to load the material selected or attached to it in here. And it's exhausting. I'll leave it on for now just so you guys can see it reacting. So if I turn up the reflection amount, so this is our snow again now. So our snow reflection color all the way up. And reflection glossiness, we'll put this down to like a 0.65. And it's just going to provide a nice glossy highlight across the entire object. And we're going to go in here and mess with some of this other stuff too, but not quite yet. We're just going to get some initial renders in first, and then we'll start screwing with that stuff. So again, for our snowy green, or our snowy floor, I'm just going to assign another new material, another viewer material. We're going to name this snowy ground. And again, really, really close to white. Just a tiny bit of blue in there. Cool. Again, full on reflections, 0.65, 0.65 on the reflection glossiness. And now that's assigned there. Great. All right, let's just get this out of the way. Actually, I'm just gonna hide it, or minimize it rather. Okay, looking good. All right, so the next thing that needs to happen is I'm gonna make this terrain even bigger, like crazy big. Our camera's gonna be about here probably. It's just gonna be taking a shot right around there. Actually, let's make our camera first. So create camera. I'm going to look through the selected camera I just created, and we'll call this shot cam. And let's back up right here. Let's look in this way. And let's turn on our resolution gate and film gate so we can actually see what we're going to be. This is what our frame is actually looking like. And let's just, so I want this to be a little bit deeper. Yeah, there we go. And then I'm going to mess a little bit with the focal length from 35 to maybe like a 32. Sure. Just so that we see a little bit more of our beautiful snowy background, which we spent so much effort and time working on. Beautiful. Okay, now we have a camera set up. We're in business. Next, let's just see what we're getting right off the bat. So I'm going to go ahead and create some lights. So light, we're going to do a direction light for our sunlight or moonlight. I don't know what this is going to be yet. I think it's going to be sunlight. And I'm just going to scale it up so I can see it a little bit better. All right. Oh, there is this one setting that they changed inside of my 2016. It's been driving me crazy. So every time you hit the R or W or E, it should reset to the selection change. It should reset to the center handle. So you see how this is the yellow one now. If I hit W again, it should snap back to the center. And that's really handy because like I can hold down Shift and middle click and then lock that, and then I can keep doing it, along that edge if I just middle click. But if I hit W again, I want that to go back to the center. I don't want that to always be stuck and locked on that Z constraint. Anyway, so that's squared away. That's great. We'll probably put the sun/moon something around there. We're gonna want to get some nice shadows. Speaking of shadows, on our directional light, sunlight. If you're doing a sunlight, it should always be tinted a little bit yellow, and I mean just a little bit. You're kind of gonna want somewhere in the between 35 and 45, or between like 30 and 45, I'd say. A pretty good value range. And saturation shouldn't be more than like 0.2, really. And we'll turn on our use ray trace shadows, which is great. Light angle. Now technically real sunlight is about 0.2. But we're going to go a little bit more whimsical on this, and we're going to say that our light is being diffused more through layers of atmosphere and stuff. So we're going to go to a light angle of 1, which should really soften out these shadows so that they're not going to be quite so harsh when they come right off the object. It's not accurate, again, but so much of 3D isn't about being 100% accurate. It's about what looks good in the end and what creates a compelling image. And so it's important to know the rules first and then to start to break them. And you hear that in every discipline, with artistry, if you're trying to be a concept designer or an art something special. Um, you always want to know the rules first and then break them afterwards. All right, so created this directional light, and let's just go in real fast and set up our vray settings. So um, first things first, always set the resolution 1920 1080. Convert image to sRGB for render view. So when it goes down here, it's going to go sRGB. We'll hide the render view because we don't need to see that right now. I'm going to set this to %s /%l /%s _%l. And I know that's complicated sounding, but it's basically just scene name, then a subfolder call for the layer name, which we're going to have right here, our render layer. And then again, a subfolder, and the file name will be scene name _ layer name. That's all. Pretty simple. I'm also going to do a don't save image here, just so that every time it finishes rendering, it doesn't have to store that image somewhere. It takes a long time sometimes. It's kind of annoying. Switch from progressive to adaptive, which is the original default for vray, and then they just added this progressive, but adaptive is pretty great. We're going to hit color mapping and just turn on the subpixel mapping, and that just allows it to get a better color representation when it's doing the GI calculation. All right, so that's good. We'll go back to GI, turn this on. I'm going to go to radiance map and light cache instead of brute force and light cache. Radiance map renders a lot faster. It's not as accurate, but it definitely gets the job done. I'm going to switch from the preset of high to custom, and then just reduce the values of these. So when this is set to 0, it's going to do 4 pre-passes before it starts doing the rendering. When you set this to -2, -3, -2, it's only going to do 1 pre-pass. Again, a lot faster. It's not as accurate, but honestly, I mean, I've used these startup settings for final projects before, and it's worked fine. It really just depends on the scene, how much light is in the scene, how much of your lighting is based on GI, and all that stuff. So settings, I like to set my render region down to 24 in X and Y, because I'm going to be doing test renders at like quarter res of 1920. So 64 size bucket means that each bucket is working super hard on a big chunk of the scene. And the smaller you make this bucket size, more buckets can do smaller chunks of the scene, and they can get through with their jobs a lot faster. You will definitely notice a speed increase when you reduce that number. Dynamic memory limit, we're going to go to -3000. So what that means is whatever your maximum amount of memory is in your machine, reduce 3 gigs from that, and then that's the maximum amount that vray will take up. Super useful, especially if you have a bunch of different render cores, or render farm for that matter, or even 2 computers, and one has 8 gigs memory and one has 32 gigs of memory. You're going to want to use as much as possible, and if you just put 8 gigs in here to accommodate your slower machine, your more powerful machine is going to be drastically underutilized. So this just says, okay, you've got 32 in here, I'm going to use 29. And oh, you've got 8 in there, I'm only going to use 5. It's really helpful. So -3000. All right. And last but not least, let's just add some render elements here. So we'll throw in a diffuse, a GI, we'll do an extra text as well. And we'll do 2 of those, and I'll show you why. GI, we'll do lighting. We'll do a normals. We'll do a multimatte too. And I'll just drop some multimattes on stuff. Reflection, refraction, specular, and z-depth and sample rate. So spec, reflect, refraction, normals, lighting, diffuse, those are all like your real basic look passes. And then I throw in the sample rate because it's going to help us tune all of our samples for our scene to be as fast as possible. And I'm also going to throw in that extra text. I'm going to do 2 of those. So do 1 more. So you see over here, there's 2 extra texts now. And one of those is going to be our occlusion, and one of those is going to be our Fresnel pass. So after you've clicked on the extra text, you go over here to extra text attributes, hit texture, and we'll go to vray dirt. That is our occlusion pass. I'm going to bump the samples up to 32 because 8 is never enough. I'm going to turn on double-sided and work with transparency. And what that means is double-sided means that any surfaces that are back-facing surfaces, like this guy in here, that would render like pure black if that wasn't turned on. Now it's going to calculate the occlusion based on the distance. Work with transparency is great for your lights. So if I throw in like a rectangle light here, And let's just go right here, vray rect light, which is your absolute bread and butter light. You should be using this light almost exclusively. If I move it down here and I make sure that it is an invisible light so you don't actually see it, it's still going to occlude or calculate in the occlusion pass against this floor. So you're going to see like this black bar here and be like, what the heck is that coming from? Well, it's coming from your light. But if you have worker transparency on your occlusion settings, then that won't show up at all. And then lastly, let's just go to our other extra text and add in a vray Fresnel pass. And I leave that at 1.5, but it's just really great for getting mattes, adding a little edge light, adding a little kick to the beauty, and especially in a snow scene, you're definitely going to want to use that Fresnel pass. Okay, so that's pretty much it. Now our V-Ray is all set up and ready to render some pretty awesome stuff. We have a light here, which I'm going to delete because we don't need it yet. We've got this directional light, and last but not least, let's just add in a dome light, just so we get some... Actually, before we add in the dome light, let's just see what we got right now. So I'm going to go down here, make sure my test resolution is set to 25%, which it is. Go to render, and let's render our shot cam. All right. It's pretty exciting. As you can see, we have amazingness. All right, so why does this look so shitty? Well, a few things. First of all, in the viewport, I'm smoothing everything with 3. So I set it back to 1. That's where we're actually rendering, and that looks terrible. And of course, our tree is indeed floating off of the ground, which is also not really that useful. I'm actually going to scoot this ground up to tuck the tree under. Okay. So all right, before we move forward and start doing some more cool lighting stuff, let's subdivide all this stuff at render time. Now there's 2 ways of doing this. I can select everything and hit 3, and then I can go up here to the render globals, go to the V-Ray tab, global options, and click on this render viewport subdivision. Render viewport subdivision is great, and if I click it on, you'll see right now that this is automatically, I'm just going to store that image. We have it before and after. It's going to take longer, first of all, but most importantly, it's going to smooth everything. But you think, great, awesome, smoothing. The problem with it, though, is it's smoothing based on its own crazy decisions. Like, I have no control over how many times that's smoothing, and I don't really like that. I like to have control because I can optimize it better that way. So if I turn this back off, set everything in here back to 1, I can grab everything in the scene and really easily go to Create, V-Ray, V-Ray Displacement, V-Ray Single, apply single V-Ray Displacement node to selection. And what that's going to do is add this V-Ray Displacement group here to our outliner. Now this is a group that you can take things in and out of it, and it doesn't affect your hierarchy at all. It's just an extra group. So I'm going to rename this VR Disp for V-Ray Displacement, and then I'm going to call it Smooth. And that's basically just making a group that's going to smooth everything that's inside of it. So if I go up here, and it doesn't do anything by default. By default, it's just a blank group. But if I go over here, I can go to Attributes, V-Ray, and add Subdivision, and Attributes, V-Ray, and add Subdivision and Displacement Quality. Now when I twirl down this extra V-Ray attributes, I have my stuff where I can control how many times it's subdividing. So right here I have Render Subdivision Surface, which is right, Subdivide UVs, which is good, it's all default. I'm going to turn off View Dependent because this is no longer going to affect me in animation. I mean, this is going to screw you up in animation if you have this on, because as an object gets further away from the camera, it'll realize that it needs less divisions to accurately subdivide the mesh, and it'll change it. And that's usually fine in a still, but in an animation, you'll see that pop. You'll see it switch between using 12 subdivisions to only using 10, then to using 8, and you'll see doop, 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 and it'll look terrible. So I always leave it off by default. Edge length I'm going to put down to 0.1, just based on the size of my grid. So only 0.1 width of one of these grid markers. So only 0.1 of it. So like from there to there, really small amount. As long as my edges are larger than that, then they'll get smoothed, which I can pretty much guarantee that everything is at least larger than 0.1. All right, so we'll go back here, and 4 subdivisions is probably fine. So again, now using the new method, everything not smoothed, if I just hit render, you'll see that it's all smoothing beautifully, and I have now full control over how many times that's smoothing, and it's great. Okay, but this scene still looks terrible. So let's add in that dome light, and it's automatically going to get 10 times better. So go to create, vray, dome light, and we'll click on dome spherical, and we're going to go down here and make it invisible. Actually, let's leave it visible for now just so we can see it in the scene. I'm going to do use dome text, click on this little dome text guy, and go down to ramp. Now, I almost always use ramps for my lighting, environmental lighting. And the reason why is ramps, as opposed to HDR, as I'm saying, ramps provide an incredible amount of control. I mean, I can change everything I want to change. And I'm never getting these weird little reflections or strange little objects that are like floating around in my highlights. And I'm like, what is going on? Where is this black bar coming from? That happens all the time. And it's super frustrating. And I just, there's a time and place for HDRs. Absolutely. I think they're really important if you're trying to match live plates, of course. Or if you just, if you have a scene that has a lot of chrome in it, or a lot of reflective objects, it's good to do an HDR because you're definitely going to see that, but only for reflections. For lighting, you really don't need all that information. I mean, honestly, the best way to light a scene with an HDR is to take that HDR into Photoshop, your giant, beautiful 360 multi-stop, tons of exposures. Take that into Photoshop and then blur the crap out of it and make it like 256 by 256. You want the small, just color. You want general color coming from all the different directions, and that is way all you need. So as soon as I realized that, and that's all we actually need from the HDR, I was like, why am I using these HDRs in the first place? I'm just going to use a ramp that sort of mimics the colors of my HDR. Then I have full control over everything. So that's a little pro tip right there. And then on top of that, when you are using an HDR for reflections, then you need to get a super, super clean high-res map. Like if you shot, a very common thing to do is to take a glazing ball. You can buy these off Amazon for like $30. It's a kind of a big chrome ball, and you can stick a little tripod underneath it, and you can drill a little hole in the bottom, and then you can take pictures of that from kind of far away. And you take a picture from one side and then from the other side, and in a program called like Stitcher or HDR Labs, there's some other stuff out there that can do it. You would stitch together this beautiful HDR, a reflection map of a 360. Problem with that is those glazing balls, they have these weird, the surface isn't perfect, so you've got these weird little dents, indentations, and bumps and everything. That is murder. It kills if you're trying to get accurate reflections back onto your objects in 3D. So the best way to do it is to shoot a 360 and then stitch that together. But in any case, in the meantime, let's just keep making something interesting over here. So what I like to do is saturate the topmost. So imagine this is like a horizon. Imagine it flipped 90 degrees, negative 90 degrees. And so this is our top of our sky. This is the bottom of our floor. This is what's right underneath us. This is the mountain range off in the distance. And as we move up, this is our top of our sky. And actually want to rich this up a little bit, kind of drop it down. Our brightest area kind of should be the horizon line. It's kind of where the sun and the haze and all the sort of atmosphere from the sky is most visible, so it's going to be kind of the brightest spot. And we'll just sort of do that like that, and then as we get higher and higher, we get a little more saturated, a little darker, until eventually right above us it's really saturated, and throw in a little bit of purple. Snow scenes really benefit from kind of a richer or purpley kind of hue. All right, cool. So we have now a little HDR. Not really, but we have a little ramp that we can pretend is an HDR. All right, I'm just going to hit render, and all of a sudden we have a snowy scene. And it's, still looks terrible, but it's in the right direction. So I'm just going to cancel that because we don't need to see the whole thing. Go down here, and now let's make this background invisible because I don't think I'm going to enjoy it. All right, so we got that going. So what I'm going to do now is actually just take this terrible tree, my crappy tree, and so there's a few things we could do. If I was really making this forest and I was happy with the way this tree looked and I was done, I would just go ahead and proxy this tree out. So let's just do that process right now. Let's take tree crappy 01. I'm gonna make a duplicate of it. I'm just gonna go up here to create vray, create proxy. And let's just drop this somewhere. I don't even think I have a project set up for this thing yet. Let's put it in my computer. Let's do storage drive. Sorry guys, hold on 1 second. Alright, projects, and we'll just do tutorial based. Here, we'll do snowy scene, cool. And we'll call this tree crappy proxy. Oh, wait, just a path. We just need a path so far. So we'll choose that path. Tree crappy 02 VR mesh, that looks good. Export all objects into a single file. That's important as well because we have a bunch of different objects making this tree, but we just want one file out of it. So that's fine. Preview quality, we definitely don't need that many. We'll just do, say, 200 faces in our preview. Everything else is fine as default. Automatically create proxies, we'll just do that, and we don't need to make a backup for it. So we'll call it tree crappy 02 proxy. And create proxy, and what we'll get is now a proxy. So there's our tree proxy. There's our original tree, still hanging out. I'll just hide that. And now we've got this proxy. And now if I render this, you'll see it looks just like our original tree. Of course, it's not smoothed. So we can smooth it by just dropping it right into our smooth group. And now when I render this again, there's our smoothed proxy tree. So that was easy. Next thing I'm going to do real fast is just add in a this program, or this little tool called SP Paint, and this tool is amazing. I was actually in the process of downloading it, so I didn't want to show. I wanted to show you guys the process. So I just downloaded it, and this is the zip file. And I'm going to go over here to my regular folder. I'm going to go to the documents, Maya 2016, and I think what I'm supposed to do is just copy this stuff in to here. So let's do that. And then if we go up a level, prefs, icons. So I'll copy that right in there. Oops, that was presets. Just kidding. Prefs, icons, and it's going to blend those or merge those two together. Blend. That's kind of crazy. What if things blended inside of Windows Explorer? I don't know what that would mean. All right, so that's pretty much it. That's installed, and I can just go down here and type in SP Paint 3D and whatever. And now we've got that. So I'm just going to go SP Paint 3D one more time. I'm going to highlight that whole thing and middle click and drag it right up here to my shelf. Make it a Mel shelf thing. Right click, do an edit. And just going to call this icon label SP Paint or something. Cool. SP Paint. So now I can access it from right there. So what I can do here is add in a geometry. And the only thing is you have to add in, it has to be a single piece of geometry. That's the only problem with it. We'll add in geometry. We'll add in our target surface that we're going to be painting it onto. Rotation. We want to rotate in the Y by 360. So these are facing all different directions. Scale, let's mess with that. So we'll go 0.8 to 1.2. And then because it's uniform, I only type it in the top one. We'll make them as duplicates of each other, and One thing that's important, because these are instances, is we can either reference or instance them. Sorry, instances. Because these are vray proxies, we can either instance them, or we can preserve input connections so that they maintain their link to the vray proxy. All right, so we'll just do that one instead. Align on surface, we don't really want that because we want these to all be kind of pointing straight up. And once we're all squared away with that, which we are, I just hit paint, and then I can just go crazy. Woo! And it's randomizing my rotation and my scale and all these different trees. And it's super, super handy and super useful. And it's you know, it's reacting to the height changes within this geometry. And now I can go up here and just do a tiny little tuck up. And here we've got a forest. So now when I render, just gonna hit this one more time. You'll see the GI is taking a little bit longer to calculate now, but snowy forest. That was pretty easy. And of course, the render times are eking up a little bit. I'm just gonna grab a drink of this beverage. Okay. Something like that. But it still looks really crappy. And of course it does, because we just started. Okay. So the next thing we're gonna do is start to throw in a little displacement on this snowy ground. And I'm just looking at this snowy ground and looking at the level of reflectivity in this, and it's probably too high. So 0.65 is going to be too much. So if I click down here and just, if I click my surface here and hit this little guy that graphs the shader attached to it, back to my snowy ground, reflection glossiness, I'm going to put that down to 0.55. And I'm going to reduce the intensity of the reflectivity just a bit. And then, you know, here's one other thing I'm going to do. I was going to wait to do this, but I'm just going to do it now. The reflection on this is perfect. You know, it feels more like metal or a plastic of some sort. So one thing we can do to break it up is to throw in a texture that's kind of got some noise and grit to it. So I'm going to go up here to CG textures, which is awesome. And let's just type in grunge or something. Maybe, actually, you know what? Let's type in rock. This is super great. All this rock stuff. Use any of these. So I think I'll grab this one, just 'cause it's kind of interesting. I'll grab the tileable one, because I'm lazy and I don't want to make this tileable myself. So show in Finder, and let's open up Photoshop, and let's mess with this just a tiny bit. You just want something that's got like a nice pattern. I mean, you know, I'm looking at the darks and the brights and everywhere inside that image, and it looks like we can find something interesting there. Downloads, rock shape. Silliness. Ay, ay, ay. Oh, Photoshop, come back to life. There we go. Ah. Okay. So here's this. I'm gonna get rid of these things. So hit S on the keyboard, and I'm gonna clone out those big patches. It's really not, I mean, we're not gonna notice it, but I just want it all to be rock. I don't want any like, what is that weird little thing there in the reflection? That's so strange. No, there, perfect. It's all rock. Okay, so now I'm just gonna Control Shift U to desaturate the image. Control M to pull up the curves, and I'm just gonna add some contrast in this thing. So I really want this to sort of pop. We're gonna use this as a reflection filter, or a glossiness filter rather. So what that means is areas that are whiter are gonna be more reflective and areas that are darker are going to be less reflective, and not necessarily so much as reflective, but it's the glossiness. So, you know, when something's really glossy, the reflections are spread really, really fine, and they're you can't really tell what they are, but they just get these nice soft, subtle reflections. And when something is really sharp, a high glossiness value, then it looks more mirror-like. You know, you can really see the reflection clearly and make out what it is inside. So that's what I'm going to use this map for, is to drive what's reflective and what's glossy. Okay, so now that's there. I'm just going to hit save. I'm going to make this a PNG. I always like working with PNGs if I can. Projects. We'll go back to that projects folder. Where was it? Tutorial based snowy steam. We'll just drop this over here. We'll make a folder in here called textures. Cool, and we'll throw that in there just as is. PNG option, compressions, okay, whatever. All right, so let's get this out of the way. Let's get that out of the way. And we'll go in here, and I'm gonna load in the file texture. So go to File, click that on, get this stuff over here, and I'm gonna pull in that texture we just made. Of course, I don't know where it is. Ah. Okay, fine. Here we go. Copy that. And paste that in here. And I'm just going to actually save this project over there so we can get back to it nice and quickly. Textures, rocky thing. Okay, awesome. All right, so I could just plug this right in here now. I'm just going to take the out R. So I only need, you know, this is a black and white image, so the red, green, and blue are all exactly the same. So I only, you know, any one of these would be fine. And the reflection glossiness is a numeric value and not a color, which means it only accepts one input. It doesn't accept an RGB input. So this is actually perfect. So I'm just gonna drag over here, and reflection glossiness is this one right here. And now you can see it got a yellow connection, because that means that reflection glossiness is being driven by this texture via the UVs. All right, so just from that change alone, and I'll just save this image out, you'll see a drastic change in our floor, but just in our floor. All right, give it some seconds. And there we go. You can already see a much more interesting pattern breakup on our snowy ground. It almost looks like shadows being cast down or something. I don't know if it really is showing up in the video. I'm hoping it is. Yeah, and so the reflections are being driven now by this, you know, whether it's glossy or straight, or you know, more reflective. Okay, so that's looking interesting. That's looking pretty cool. But I actually want to control this a little bit more. So here's what I'm gonna do. These values right now, if we go back to Photoshop, so we have certain values in here that are really low. So if I pull up the info panel, if you look at the RGB values right here, you know, we're down to 49, 35, 20, and then we go all the way as high as, you know, I think this is the brightest area here, 197, 200. So when you think of a black and white image, or the value range being from 0 to 255, we have almost the whole range in here, which is great for certain things, but not so great for something like this, because what that's doing is setting my glossiness values between like 0.1 and 1, or like 0.01 and 1. And remember I said just a bit ago that I don't like to go below 0.5 on my glossiness values. So these values are going way too low, and then they're contrasting going way too high. And I can control that in here in my map in Photoshop by just doing like a levels, and then, you know, pulling up my blacks and then pushing down my whites, so that I get this kind of low contrast image where my value range is switching between, you know, here we're at 134, 135 to a sort of max at about 145. So that value range is kind of going to be like 0.5 to 0.6, which is great. That's what I want. I just don't want to do it on my image in Photoshop, because that limits that image's capability. So if I leave that set that way, sorry. if I leave that set like this with the high contrast, then I can actually adjust that here in Maya. So there's this node called set range, which I'm going to pull in. It went over here. And it's basically like forcing a levels. So I'm going to take my out R again. And you know what I'm going to do is shift, middle click, and drag. This opens up the connection editor. So my left side is my file texture, and my right side is my set range. So I'm going to take my out color R, which is the only one I actually need. They're all the same, so I could use RG or B. I'm going to choose R because it's typical. And I'm going to plug it into my value of X. And what that's doing is just taking this, and this set range has its own value that it wants to input, and then has an output value that it outputs after it runs through these calculations. So I'm only going to be working in this R channel here because I'm only working from the R channel here. All right, so my old minimum maximum was 0 and 1, which makes sense. And my new minimum maximum, I want to be 0.5 and 0.7, let's say. Actually, let's do 0.55 and 0.75. And so I'm forcing all those values, all my blacks to be like grayed up to like a mid-level gray, and all my whites to be pulled down to like a slightly brighter than mid-level white. And then I'm going to plug this into my reflection glossiness, my out value, and actually I'm going to do a shift, middle click, and drag again, and out value X into reflection glossiness. There it is, reflection glossiness. Cool. And you can see it changed the connection, so now it's going through this set range. All right, and we do one more test render here. And we probably won't see too much of a noticeable change here, but it's going to be one of those subtle variations that we're gonna pick up on as we go along. And so now you can see that we see the reflection of the tree again, but it's kind of being broken up. It's not like a pure reflection anymore, and that's what we wanted. Cool. All right, so moving along, just gonna minimize this, and we don't need to be painting any more trees anytime soon. Okay, so now let's kind of work on the displacement of this stuff. So I want this snowy road or ground to be displaced kind of nicely, have some interest to it. So what I'm going to do is, remember, oh, we got all these tree proxies. I'm just going to take them all and group them so they're kind of out of the way and call them tree proxies. Hold on just one second. Sorry, I'm new to the streaming thing, and trying to get my friends to watch and just give me some feedback, and I've lost them. Okay, so let's add some displacement down here. Displacement's super useful for all sorts of things. I'm just gonna do all right, so we've got a displacement smooth group which has our ground in it. I'm gonna make a new one with it ground selected, vray displacement, and apply single vray displacement. We're gonna do vr disp ground snow. That's good. Okay, and again we're gonna add the subdivision displacement quality, and finally displacement control. So same kind of stuff before. Check that off. Put this to 0.1. Max subs of 4 is great. And now we've got this displacement controller. I'm going to leave keep continuity on, because if you leave that off while you're displacing geometry, like things could start to pull away from each other, like two pieces of geometry. So keeping that on like forces them always to stay connected. So that's good. And for our displacement material, I can plug in any kind of file texture or any texture at all, and it's just going to use the UVs. So I'm going to go ahead and plug in a, let's do a noise. Noise are nice and easy. Okay. And just with no changes, just the default stuff. Let's just see what we get. Close this out, and we'll do a render right here. And you'll start to see, yeah, so this is starting to get a little bit crazy. So our ground is starting to lift up in weird places, starting to push down in weird places, and we are getting some really nice displacement. Well, we're getting some displacement. I wouldn't say this is really nice displacement. It's just something. All right, and if we go up through our passes, we can kind of see a little bit better maybe what our displacement is doing. And you can see right here, these big flat sections is where our displacement is clipping to 1. You know, it's staying at a constant value of 1. And then here is where our displacement is dropping down below 1 and running through a bunch of different variations. And you see these like sharp lines, these striations. And that's because the noise, the way the noise actually is generated is actually a bunch of overlapping gradiated circles. So it's a circle that has a radial gradient on it, and they're all just stacking and overlapping all over each other. So that's where you're starting to see this pattern showing up. It doesn't really show up as much when you're working on regular sample, you know, regular uses of noise, but when you're doing it as a displacement map, you really start to see it pop up. It looks pretty shitty. So we're gonna choose something else, but at least you can see kind of what we got right off the bat. So I'm gonna go in here and let's go back to CG textures. Haha, Remy. I had 2 people in here. I had 3 people in here for a little while, and then they all left, and now it's just me and you, buddy. Right on. Yeah, I'm gonna start doing this from now on. I'm gonna start doing some tutorial stuff here and there. You know, I want to start recording the process of making games and all this stuff too. That's the plan. But anyway, moving along. still making this silliness. So we'll go up here and we'll grab another texture. Something kind of fun, something kind of soft, pillowy like. Let's keep looking. Okay, well, let's just take this for now. That's gonna be pretty wild. You know what? That's gonna be too wild. Let's take this one instead. That one feels good. Download that for credit. And show in Finder. Go over here. All right, cool. Desaturate that guy. Add some contrast to it. Cool. Save this back out. Our snowy scene textures. We'll just call this rocks disp 01 for displacement. Oh, it's a JPEG. I want to save these out as PNGs. I don't think it's going to make too big of a difference right now, but rocks disp 01. Cool. All right. So going back here, we'll go back to our vray snow displacement group. I'll break this connection and just plug in a file texture instead. So file texture, where is that thing? There it is, file. And do this rocks displacement PNG. And let's just hit render again and see what we get. So it's gonna look pretty different. And sure enough, it looks pretty different. So you can see using a real texture, you get a lot of visual variation, but you also get a lot of like potential stuff you don't want. And you can tell really badly right here the resolution of the image I'm using and the bit quality and the bit depth rather seriously are not up to par. You know, these are giant pixelated displacement parameters. It's just because the resolution of the image is so low. So what we can do is a few things. So first of all, we're going to need more subdivisions on this thing. So we go back to the ground, and our max subdivision is set to 4. We're going to set this up to like 12. And that's just going to allow the map to subdivide the geometry way more so that all the little details that it has will show up. I'm also going to turn my edge length down to 0.01 just to make sure that this thing, every little last inch of this is smoothing. And we'll see the difference right here. So if I just save this again and let this render out. So this should start to look a little bit better, but I think we are really going to be limited by our map size. Yeah, no, it still looks pretty awful. Okay, so there's a few other things we can do to fix this. We could turn off our filter. We can go back in here and start messing with these values a little bit. So let's just pump up the displacement a little more. So we'll do 1.5, actually we'll do 2 and negative 1. Let's turn our filter blur up a little bit. So we'll do to 0.01. And let's just take this all the way down to 0.001 with max subdivs at 24. Now this seems like overkill, but it's one of these things. It's good to overkill, go back and forth until you know what your limits are, and then you can dial things back to an area that makes sense. And this is clearly not making a whole lot of sense. I mean, this is just insanity. But you're going to see that it is displacing a little bit more. Well, no, it still looks terrible. Well, that's what happens when you use 8-bit images that you download off the internet. Yeah, you can see that. It's awful. So one thing we can do to sort of get around this is we can tile our image twice or 3 times. I think that was probably too much. We'll go negative 0.5. We'll go back up here to our file 2D and tile this, say 3 and 3. And it's going to make the whole thing a lot more dense, which you don't really want either. So here's one thing I'm going to do to help out with this. So this is, I almost always do this with maps I downloaded that I'm using for displacement, is you blur them. You blur them a lot. So I'm going to go here, filter, blur, Gaussian blur. And we'll do something like that. And then I'm also going to go to filter. I want to do a cutout. So 3D distort, where is that stupid thing? Actually, I need to do a cutout. No, actually, just a blur probably be enough. So let's resave this. Oi. PNG, snowy scene, textures, and we'll call this displacement 02. Switch back over to Maya. Oh, Maya's still rendering. That's why it's going so slow. Alright. Well, that looks pretty bad. Nice. So I go back here to our file 2, switch this to displacement 02. And I'm actually also going to start my task manager and tell Maya that it needs to save 1 node for streaming. Perfect. Okay, so now that we switched that to our blurry map, this should start to look a little nicer. And that is starting to look a little nicer. So it's a little softer. You still get these nice like pop marks. You get these, nice variations, these areas that are, it kind of looks like it's sitting on a grassy field. Grass always tends to clump up and have these little bulges in it. So that's kind of starting to get somewhere. And another thing that's really important is making sure that our lighting direction is something useful that's helping us. Right now, it's just sort of coming from the side, and it's not really all that interesting. but that's okay. So we'll turn that off, cancel that render, and let's just change our direction of our light to be, I don't know, maybe off in this direction a little bit more. Just tilt it up. Okay, so lighting from behind is usually a lot of fun, but it can also really blow out your highlights, your specular highlights. So you just got to keep an eye on that. We'll throw another rectangle light here, and always whenever I'm lighting snow scenes, I want to have my key light as like the warm kind of bluer light, or the warm rather sunlight, and then throw in some cool lights bouncing around from the other sides. So also never ever scale your lights like this in Maya. It totally calculates the light wrong that way. You always got to use vray rectangle shape and change the UV size. So we'll go to something like 20 and 20 here, and that should do the trick. Go down to 1 on our intensity, and I'm gonna make this kind of a warmer pinky kind of purpley light coming off from this direction. So imagine there's like, I don't know, sky that's kind of picking up those colors, or just, I don't know, a pink Power Ranger that's just like glowing or something. I don't know. Just pretending there's pink over there. It's useful. It's very useful. All right, let's see what our render looks like now. We start to get some hue variation coming in, and you can see exactly what happened was what I was saying might happen. Now our specular highlight is just blowing out like crazy because our sun is coming from behind camera. So if you look at the lighting pass, everything looks fine. This all looks normal. I mean, obviously we get these black edges that look kind of crummy, but if we keep going to and even reflection pass looks fine. Our specular pass, oh man, rough. This is terrible. If I right click over these values, we're hitting values of 3, 2.9, 3.9. I mean, that is not good. So if for some reason you absolutely need to have the sun coming from behind like this, there are 2 solutions. One is, and I'm gonna tell you the solutions because sometimes you need to, but obviously what I'm gonna actually do is rotate the light back around so that we're not running into this problem. But if you do need to, there's 2 options. You can either take your snow shader and turn down your reflection color amount to like 0.5 or something in a much subtler range so that these highlights aren't nearly as bright. But that's also going to change the look of your snow shaders, and everything's going to start to look different. It's going to kind of be a pain in the butt. The other thing you can do is duplicate out your sunlight. And make sure the rotation doesn't change, but you can change the position of it, of course. And make one your sunlight for lighting and one your sunlight for spec. So I'm going to take this sunlight and I'm going to turn off emit specularity, or emit specular. And I'm going to go to this one and turn off emit diffuse. And I'm going to take the intensity of my spec light down to like 0.2 or something way more manageable. And that way this isn't casting any spec, but it's got the right temperature illumination to the scene. And this one is casting spec, but it's a much more subtle spec. So we'll see right there the difference of just switching that. So I'm going to save this real fast and give it a second to render, and there we go. Now everything is, we still get the nice specular highlights because our shader still has good reflectivity and specularity, but our highlights are way more manageable because they're only being cast off of a 0.2 instead of a full 1. Now obviously the downside of this is that you're working with 2 lights from now on, so you just need to make sure that you're always careful that if you rotate one light around that you rotate the other one too. But aside from that, this should work out pretty nicely. And you can see our spec highlights are still blowing out, but my maximum values here are 1.1, 1.3 instead of 3.9 and craziness like that. which would look terrible when you brought into compositing and started trying to actually work with this thing. So that is a nice little trick to get around spec blowouts that are horrible. And I'm not really seeing the contribution of this pink light here. So I'm going to bump up its intensity a little bit. And I'm actually going to swing it back around because I want it to not... I still want to see a core shadow in between my lighting direction and my bounce light over here. I'm not really seeing a core shadow on these things. You know, they're going from bright and then they just go straight into a gradation of color. I don't want that. So let's try this, and I'm gonna get rid of this whole mess now and rotate my light back around to something a little bit more manageable. Let's get that over there, and let's do another test run real fast and see what we get. All right, so it's starting to turn into a scene. And I'm going to throw a background back there just for our sanity's sake. And it's also going to help determine what our colors are looking like. So I'm just going to go to Google and type in snowy winter landscape. And let's see what we get. Okay. It's really nice images. Why don't we take, let's see, I guess I can take this one. I don't know, it's kind of a weird one. Nah, I'll take this one. Yeah, crap, it's got stuff all over it. It's too much foreground. All right, fine, I'm taking this one. Just because it's here and it's ready. Uh-oh. Is it one of these weird... Might be one of these weird things. Oh, okay, no, it worked out. Alright, so let's just take this into Photoshop. And let's see if there's anything we want to do to it. Superb wallpapers. You know, sorry guys, you're awesome. But I'm just going to cut this out for the sake of this tutorial. Oops. Not duplicate it. Cut it out. Okay, just for the sake of the tutorial, let's just get rid of that thing. Okay, cool. Let's save this into our project folder. Textures, we'll call this, yeah, winter landscape, whatever. PG, fine. JPEG, it's fine. Ideally, I like to use PNGs for everything, but, you know, a JPEG occasionally slips in there now and again. It's not the end of the world. Okay, so when I'm setting up backgrounds, I just like to, I kind of like to foolproof it. You know, there's a way to do it really nicely, I know, and I've seen some people do it really fast. And I'm like, what'd you do? But the way I do it is not as elegant, but it works. So I just check the image size of my image. Go to pixels, 1920 by 1080. That's the actual resolution of this image. So, go down here to my scale, 1920, 1080. There we have our backdrop. And then I just scale it uniformly from the center. And I know that this is now the right size for my image, so it's not going to scale and stretch and do weird things. I know it's silly, but it works. Oops, just re-rotate. Yeah, there we go. Okay, and tuck that up like that. Great. And I'm just going to right click on this, assign new material, and throw on a vray light material. Compensate camera exposure, and for my color, just turn on the file and load in our winter landscape. If I hit 6, we can see that. Awesome. How beautiful. And if we just look through our camera, we can kind of, oh, okay, gotta go that big. It'll be somewhere like there. Cool. So last thing, this is an actual plane of geometry, so it's going to cast shadows from our sunlight, and that's not what we want. So with it selected, I'm just going to go up here to render stats and turn off primary visibility, or sorry, cast shadows and receive shadows. We don't want it to receive anything, but it can be visible in reflections and refractions. Should be fine. Okay, and we'll do another test render with that background in there just to see what things are looking like. Oh, wait, one last thing. Well, I'll render it just so you guys can see the problem. But what you're going to see is the image looks very washed out, like it's missing its richness and saturation and depth that it had before. And the reason why is because this image is not being treated as an sRGB image. So yeah, you can see right away. Like versus this, look at how rich and dark these tones are. Everything is very saturated and very contrasty. And when we look back here, it all looks really bright and kind of crummy. So really easy to fix that. Just go here to our thing. Let's pull up the hypershade. Just gonna scrunch that down. And I'm going to graph the material that's attached to this. Click on my file texture, attributes, vray, texture input gamma. And that puts a little extra vray attribute there that just adjusts the gamma to compensate for our linear workflow style gamma, which we've set up, or which is the default now, to 2.2 here. So it's compensating that 2.2 back down to the actual color depth of that image, or color space of that image. And now we'll see the difference of just putting a little checkbox on versus this one. And you're going to see the image is going to be a lot more rich and saturated and pop up. It's going to look better. There we go. I mean, now it's too dark. But one battle at a time. I mean, we're not trying to match this background or anything. We're just putting some back there, so it's not so crappy looking. If we were trying to match this background, however, we could probably match it pretty easily. If I just go back here to Photoshop, let's get an idea of where the light's coming from. I mean, well, it's pretty obvious because you can see the sun back there. So the light is coming from behind us, or behind camera, sorry, behind the trees, towards camera. And it's pretty much just a very ambient lighting scenario. There's not really a whole lot of specific lighting going on. So that being said, we can kind of mimic that in our scene if we just, yeah, this is looking pretty terrible right now. We just scoot this around to the back side like we did before, but I'm also going to take it way down to like a 0.3, and I'm going to let this, I'm going to switch this over to be more of a yellow instead of a pink to kind of mimic this section. And I'm going to move this to this side. Just make sure I'm on world. Yep. Rotate this around like that. Scoot this over. And I'm also going to take down the intensity of all of my snows. So they're not going to be quite white anymore. They're going to be a little dimmer. So we'll go to maybe like there. Just that little blue tint. And same thing for our other snow. Just going to kind of match that color. Cool. So now when we do a render. And one last thing, I'm going to take, just looking at this image here, you know, the sky color on this image is really, really blue, really saturated. I mean, this has been treated in Photoshop, of course, but we can kind of mimic that if we just mess with our dome light ramp a little bit. So here, I'm going to go to my ramp and I'm going to start saturating my blues and darkening them a bit more. And it's just going to start to cast that blue, nice, saturated, dark image into our scene a little bit better. Keep going down. I'm actually going to reduce the intensity of our little horizon. I'm also going to make our horizon start to go a little bit orange. So again, trying to mimic what we were seeing in our gradient here. It's kind of going to be our gradient here. Okay, that's looking cool. Just go a little more saturated on that, and a little more yellow, or red rather. Here we'll go a little bit more yellow. And you don't want to go too crazy with these ramps, you know, when you're making them. But you do want to try to get some of those values in there, and they have to be kind of intense in order for them to really get picked up, because, you know, it's going to be overwhelmed by the light that's coming from the top half and the bottom half of this scene. And just because we're working with a snow scene right now, I'm not going to have to go so warm on the bottom. I can stay a little on the cooler side. So I'm going to swing these all around to blue. And that'll probably help us as well to sort of mimic what's going on in this image. And there's actually quite a lot of purple. So I'm going to take these blues on the bottom. I'm going to shift them over away from the green and a little bit more towards the purple. And last but not least, this guy right here, our connector. Cool. All right, so let's see what we get right out of that. If I just hit this thing again, should be a little more in the range. I think it's going to be too saturated. Yeah. Okay. So the reason right now that it almost looks like this is water than instead of snow is because of this crazy map I'm using here. This guy. So here's what I'm going to do. Is I want this to feel more stretchy and not so blobby. So before I do any more of that, I'm going to swing this back over. Cool. I'm going to take my displacement that's attached to that ground, take my file texture, which I repeated now 3 and 3. I'm going to do 1 and 3. And it should start stretching it in one direction. Hopefully it's stretching it in this direction. I'm not really sure right yet which way it's going to go. But just want to see that thing. Yeah. You know, we're just going to see these little, like, these layers, like these little shelves, as opposed to like these blobby little, you know, like this. Okay, so let's do another render real quick. This is just how these things go. You know, it's a lot of test rendering and fiddling with stuff. And okay, so it's going the wrong direction. Until you finally get something that you're happy with, and then you never want to touch the scene again because you're like, it's done. Don't touch it. Let's get a break. 3 and 1 instead of 1 and 3. And again, you know, I think I'm gonna do my little trick here. So I'm gonna duplicate the spot, the sunlight, make one a speck light and one a diffuse light. Just so I have a little more control over the intensity. So we'll do 0.1 or 0.05 even of the specularity. Okay, and you know, another thing I'm going to do is actually turn on vray RT. So I just go here, render, IPR, RT, scene cam. Oh crap, forgot to turn on proxies and all that stuff. Go to the RT engine, we'll turn on vray proxy objects and displacement and subdivision. Cool. And we go here, RT again, and set this up. And what are we getting? All right, there's all the stuff back. We have these nice sweeping things from our displacement map now. You know, sort of looks like wind that's sort of blown over the objects as opposed to like, I don't know what it was looking like before, but it looked crappy. All right, so if we really wanted to match this backplate, and I'm not saying we do, but let's just try it, see how that works, how that feels to do that. It's mostly going to be in our dome light, so it's just finding the right temperature values here to mimic what we've got going on back there. So I can already see I'm going to need more saturation. And that's starting to feel a little bit better. Okay, and then I'll take even this one and throw a little more saturation into it. Yeah. Okay, and you can already see, you feel it like these are all starting to get darker and darker. I mean, you have to forgive the beautiful, oh, Chum, buddy. My cat is walking on my keyboard and messing things up. And sitting on cups. Crazy, crazy cat. Okay, so let's see how much saturation we're needing just to get these things to feel right. And I think I'm actually going to want to swing this one around. There we go. Okay. So now all of a sudden you're starting to see these values getting closer and closer. More so than they were before. Let's drop down our intensity and up our saturation a little bit. Okay. So it's starting to feel a little closer. And finally, God, kitty, right here, really? Okay. All right, and we'll take both of these lights. And see, this is the issue that you run into when you start to separate these things. Is now you've got to work with two lights. It's kind of annoying. Let's turn off our discrete rotate. Okay, cool. That's starting to feel nice. We're getting some rim lighting, some edge lighting going on here. This is our main source of light now, so we're seeing that reflecting down into the ground here. Things are kind of bouncing around. Let's see what happens if we get some more of this warm sort of rounding out light coming in. Okay, it's cool. I want it to come a little bit more from the back, so I'm just going to rotate that around. Oops. All right. Cool. Trying to get somewhere. And I'm just going to make one more here. And I really want to boost and mimic this light that's coming from here in the scene. So, oh, that is not an invisible light. And this one probably isn't either. Invisible, great. So yeah, just taking the sort of the color and tone that's in there, which is, we're pretty close to that now. And I'm just trying to cast that back into the scene. It's always a good idea if you're trying to use something as a light source to also throw in a V-ray light around that area with a similar light color. Because emitting light from an object tends to cost a lot in terms of samples. You know, things are going to be very, very, very heavy to render, and you're going to get a lot of grain. But if you throw a light in there, that light is going to be throwing its own samples at the scene, and those samples are going to be bouncing around, and it's going to feel a lot more natural, and it's going to look a lot better, and it's going to render faster, and it's going to be less grainy. So overall, like, great stuff to actually, you know, throw a real light back there. So we'll do another test render here now that we've got this sort of starting to settle in. And I'll just scale this up a little so you can see it starting to come together. All right. So it's you know, it's nothing too special yet, but you can already see just with a few lights and, you know, with the displacement shader or displacement map. I mean, these trees are terrible. They're such junk, but you know, pretty quickly. I mean, we've been recording now for, I mean, it's been an hour and a half, but I've been explaining a lot of stuff as I go. If I was just working, you know, I could put this together in about 45 minutes. And you get something right away that, like, you can talk about at least. You know, you can take this to your creative director, art director, and be like, all right, so here's the thing. Here's what we got. You know, what do you guys think? Like, is this the right direction? Is this interesting? And, you know, then they can say, no, that's terrible. What are you thinking? You're a maniac. Or they can say, at least we can talk about this. And they take it in Photoshop and draw all over it and stuff. And then you can go from there. But at least it gets you started, you know? All right, so I'm already seeing, like, our levels are quite different, clearly. This is something I would probably take into Photoshop to finalize, but, you know, how bright the sky is hitting this snowy object versus this, like, these should match here. So just for posterity, just because we're here and we're all doing this together, I'm going to turn off the primary visibility on this guy, so it's still casting reflections and stuff into the scene. And I'm going to do a half res render and just pull it into Photoshop and do a few quick levels and adjustments just to really like dial these two together. So let's just do that real fast. It should take a few minutes to render, and in those few minutes I am going to go and grab a drink of water. So please sit tight and watch this thing come out, and I'll be right back. All right. Oh, wow. Okay. That's still going to take a little while to render. Just totally fine. In the meantime, let's get Photoshop ready to start doing some color matching. We don't need that anymore, so I'm going to close that out. Like that, and close that out. Cool. Here's our beautiful background from the guys over at at Superb Wallpapers. Very nice. It is the very, very first Google image I found when I was looking up images, which is fun for Winter Wonderland. Let's see how we're doing with our render. Can close that down. There's Maya. There it is. Okay, getting there, making progress. You know, so right now you may be noticing that my render times are kind of long, and that is there's a few reasons for that, but the biggest reason for that really is if we look at the sample rate. Holy cow, this right here, if you saw this sample rate, actually for that matter, if I saw this sample rate, I was working, you know, in the professional world, I would be like, whoa, this scene is taking 15 times longer than it needs to render this frame. What that's showing me is, so there's two engines inside of vray. There's a DMC sampler and there's a subdivision sampler. The DMC sampler is going to handle all your aliasing around your edges of your geometries, and the subdivision sampler is going to handle all your glossy reflections, your noise and stuff like that. Glossy reflections, light subdivisions, material subdivisions, anything that is going to kind of give you a grainy look because it doesn't have enough subdivisions in order to render it properly and calculate the reflections properly. That's all handled by the subdivision sampler. So when you look at this, what we're doing is basically saying, I want the sampler that handles the aliasing of my edges of geometry to handle all of my blur reflections as well, all of my glossy samples as well, all this other stuff that it's not good at doing, and it's of course taking over and creating this gigantically horrible red map. What this should look like is almost all this should be blue, but only around our little objects, like around the borders of our trees, should be red, because that has to do with aliasing around the edge of geometry. Everything else should be totally blue, like maybe hints of green here and there. And we have it's quite the opposite. Sorry, we have a blue background, obviously, because it doesn't need to sample anything for the background, because it's just alpha, it's just blackness, nothing. But we'll go ahead and fix that really fast in the next iteration. But for now, just wanted to get this image out so we can start messing with it a little bit. And I totally forgot to click on that Don't Save Image button. Let's see, I think it's too late. But if I turn that off, I think I'm just gonna have to save these out manually. So that's kind of the annoying thing. You gotta make sure you remember to actually click that thing back off when you want to, or yeah, off when you want to actually save the image out. And of course, yeah, it didn't save the image out. Okay, so no problem. We'll save it ourselves. So we'll do that is just go to the save button here and go to storage projects, tutorial based snowy scene, and we'll call this renders, just so we can start messing with something. We'll call this snowy test 01.png, and I'm also going to want to save out my occlusion pass. Sure, why not? So we'll do this, save snowy scene renders snowy test OCC V01. Cool. And I'd love to save out my Fresnel also. You know, I'm gonna take this reflect because I think we can use this to do some nice stuff. So let's take the snowy scene renders snowy test. Oh, you know what? It's actually already going to append all the extra text stuff onto it. So let's do snowy test V01. It's going to append the reflect flag onto that. And we don't need to see that. So this is our for now. And I'm also going to grab this guy. Oops. Save snowy scene renders. And we'll call this snowy test 01. Boom. Great. All right, so those are maps. Let's go back into Photoshop and let's pull these things in. And where do we go? Here, snowy test 01 is renders. Cool. Grab all those. Awesome. So this is our main beauty. Let's just pull this background in behind it. And I have to scale it way down because we don't need all of that. And we'll scoot this up. And we're already pretty close. You know, we're in the right ballpark at least, which is good. I'm going to grab this and tuck it on top. I was doing shift and drag. That way it stays in place. And last but not least. All right, cool. So let's mess with this a little bit. Let's have some fun. Okay, so first things first, I'm gonna hold down Shift, or sorry, Alt, and click on this guy here. Oh, that doesn't work anymore. Ah, fine. Let's do it your way. I'm just gonna create a curves adjustment layer and pull it right over that, and then hold down Alt and click on between the layers, and that's just gonna mask it by that bottom, that layer that it's on top of. Okay, so let's just boost up the lightness a little bit here. Take this down. And here I'm going to be essentially adding in some contrast to the whole thing. But it's also going to be saturating the colors, which I don't really want to do. So I'll pull the saturation back in a second here. So we'll do another hue saturation. And, you know, kind of fiddle with this little stuff. It's kind of fun. Let's reflect. We can just screen this back on again, and it just kind of boosts things. I mean, this is going to be too much of a boost, but I kind of like what it's doing in the trees over here. So I'm going to put a mask on. I'm going to invert the mask and then paint in where I want it. So I want it kind of over here. So paint a little bit there. You know, it's kind of nice there. And of course our stuff here is all blown out, so I'm just gonna hit. What are you doing? What's the problem? Ah. I don't know why. I don't know what it thinks. Okay, well, weird. But alright. Okay, so we'll just take off some of that intense. Oh, come on now. There we go. I don't know what was doing what. And I thought I was trying to do something bad. Okay. And I'm just going to blur this a little bit. Vision, cause blur. Sure. Let's blur my mask. All right, cool. So let's doing some fun stuff. I don't know. I'm never gonna be able to make these things look like they belong in the same world, but it's one of those. It's one of those things. Just kind of take it as far as you can. Occlusion is gonna be helpful, I think. But okay, so this is actually kind of a big don't. Occlusion should almost never be put on at 100%, and it should almost never be black. Occlusion should. So if I look at this pass here, it's a black and white. If I just look at it solo, it's black and white, and that's great. But you're always gonna want to tint this thing to be like a bluish, or whatever the sky color is gonna be, So we'll just go here and colorize this, and there we go. We're kind of throwing blue into where the blacks are. And then on top of that, when you finally do, so let's just merge these together so that we've got the blue there. When you finally do end up merging this in as a multiply, it's way too heavy. Like, it makes the whole scene look kind of crummy. One thing that's really important too is while you're working in, when you're using GI, you're already getting the occlusion pretty much for free. It already comes along for the ride. So any other occlusion you add on top is going to be enhancing the effect. It's going to be doubling it, essentially. Also, we're getting this really bad black matte edge. I don't know if you can see it in the screen recording. But as soon as I turn this occlusion on, see how everything gets like a black outline around it? I mean, you can see it throughout the whole image. That is just an unfortunate problem with the occlusion pass. But we can get rid of that if we just go to Layer, Matting, Remove Black Matte, and ta-da! We've gotten rid of our weird black matte alpha. And that is probably going to be an issue with a lot of this stuff because these images tend to do that when they come out as PNGs, if they're not like specifically chosen. I don't know why. My Photoshop keeps on thinking I'm doing something terrible, or it thinks that I'm clicking on something. So anyway, I would kiss in this occlusion pass at about maybe 25-20%, something like that. Just real subtle, just to help sort of ground stuff. And then what I would do if I really wanted to blend this in is I would just paint over stuff. So I'm going to take a layer, a screen layer up on top here, and I'm just going to grab this color like there. We have a nice big fat soft brush and put the opacity and the flow down to like 30% or 20% and just like kiss in some of this edge lighting, this edge glowing. Maybe make the color a little more white. Keep on. I'm gonna fade this way back too in a minute here. But this is just gonna sort of like say, okay, these are all part of the same world. This is all the same kind of stuff. And then grab the eraser and start to erase in what you just painted on. So you just really want to affect the edges and the overlap between these two things. Something like that. I don't know. And bear with me, guys. These are not supposed to go together. And then what I would probably do, because it isn't really working, is I would just close the file. No. I don't know. What I would do at this point is I try to just keep on trying to balance this. Try to desaturate some of these objects, saturate more of them. And then I'd eventually say, okay, this is as far as I can go here. I need to go back into 3D and get some better looking trees, and so on and so forth. But what this was really here for is just to say, this is how you can really quickly set up a snowy scene inside of vray. Shaders to use, render settings to use, and that kind of stuff. So, yeah, that's that. And with that, I think I'm going to sign off for a bit and maybe continue doing this tutorial a little bit later. I actually have to go. Oh, holy cow. I really have to go. All right. Well, it's been great. Thanks everybody for sticking around. Really happy that I had more viewers than just me this time. And I will. I'll let you guys know. I'll be on again later today. I'm just gonna keep doing tons and tons and tons of tutorials, just techniques and tips and workflow stuff that I've learned over my years of being a commercial VFX artist and stuff like that. All right. Thanks everybody. Bye.